In this video, we'll be looking at residential dwellings, the way we live today, part 2. So continuing our overview of residential buildings in America. We'll be starting out really by talking about what vernacular architecture is, what that term means, and then just doing a really brief overview of single-family home styles, townhomes, apartments, and mixed-use buildings. So, American vernacular. What does the word vernacular mean? That's something you hear a lot or will hear a lot. What does that terminology mean? Well, vernacular architecture is architecture concerned with domestic and functional rather than public or monumental buildings. So we're thinking about homes where people live generally. Not with big public commercial buildings, churches, cathedrals, all of that kind of stuff. So really thinking on that human level. So the first kind of, truly single family, all-American home is the Cape Cod. So it's really considered to be the worker's cottage, is another term for it. They're small, economical, practical. They were built all across the U.S. during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And if you remember in the last video, we talked about, those houses around that time were pretty petite, around 750 square feet. So you'll see these houses again all over, and they're, quite small. So the Cape Cod on the exterior is symmetrical. There's generally a centered front door and a centered chimney above it. The roofs are usually steep, and there's gables popping out. They have shingled siding very often, not always. Generally double hung windows with shutters on the sides, and they're very simple. On the inside, and this would also be the outside too, they're generally 1 or 1.5 stories, so they're not big. There's low ceilings, again, usually symmetrical in layout, having a center hall. Usually, have an open concept type of living area. Bedrooms are often, up in that, kind of gabled story up above. And the ornamentation inside is very, very simple. Next, we have the Craftsman Bungalow. So the term craftsman comes from the name of the popular magazine published by furniture designer Gustav Stickley, which was published from 1901 to 1916, as we can see the image here. Stickley was a leader in the arts and crafts movement, which was really, against this whole industrial mass manufacturing, and it was really all about the sensitivity to handcrafted, simple designs, sometimes referred to as like a folksy design. Bungalows were hugely popular in America between 1890 and about 1940. And there's even companies like Sears Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, and other companies like that did mail order houses. So again, kind of like those restaurants in the last video where they're mail ordered, but in this case, they're not prefabricated, but you can buy the house plans, out of a catalog, get them built. And there are many kinds of bungalows, many. And they will vary, but this is kind of the most standard type of bungalow. This term actually dates back to 18th century India. Bangla or Bengala, it's a Hindi word for the province of Bengal, and was used to refer to small one-story huts. Those usually had thatched roofs, but very comfortable. And then this name later came to be used for houses that were built for the British colonial authorities, so kind of a big shift. Typically, a bungalow is going to have a low-pitched gable roof, occasionally hipped, meaning it angles in on all sides. They usually have like a wide open overhang. You can see exposed roof rafters underneath the roofs. They're pretty simple in terms of decoration, but they'd still have some. Again, often 1.5 stories, but sometimes 2. They tend to be horizontal in shape, The porch usually has really big, thick, generally square columns, as you'll see in this image, sometimes round. The porch supports are usually tapered as well. And the supports usually go down to the ground level. And then, the surface can be wood, it might be stone or stucco, that can vary. We generally see an exterior stone chimney, so you can usually see it going all the way up. The public, if you will, living spaces are on the ground floor with the bedrooms upstairs usually. The living room is at the center, again with a dominant fireplace, both inside and out really. The rooms usually connect without a hallway where you just go room to room. Bungalows have a lot of built-in furniture, like millwork, lighting, things like that. A lot of windows. Sometimes like stained glass as well. Beamed ceilings are common, and having a lot of dark wood, like wainscoting, moldings, things like that. So here's a typical Craftsman Bungalow interior. You're seeing the beams and all of that built-in woodwork. Next we have the ranch. So, the ranch house is really fusing these modern ideas, and styles and notions that kind of were coming out of the American West. And these houses are very livable. They're unpretentious. They have low sloping roof lines, sometimes flat. And their whole idea is bringing the outside in. The ranch could also be referred to as the American ranch, a rancher, a rambler, or a California ranch. So any of those terms would really be referring to the same style of house. So on the exterior, again, we're thinking of a long, low-pitched roof line. Could be angled, might be flat. It really kind of depends on the area of the country. Someplace where you get a lot of snow and that type of thing, the flat roofs are less common because, you want to get the weight of the snow off the building. The materials can vary pretty dramatically, but most common would be like stucco, wood, brick, or stone. You could have a cross-gabled, side-gabled, or a hip roof with deep overhanging eaves, large windows, sliding glass doors. Attached garages are very, very common with the ranch, and there's usually some sort of back patio associated with them on the outside. Interior, when you just think of how it feels to live and be in the space, generally one story is what we're thinking of. If it goes beyond one story, it gets to be a bit of a different definition. We're thinking about open concept living area, dining room, kitchen, all really connected. Separate bedrooms, of course, and often a ranch home will have 3. That's kind of the most common number, although, of course, that can vary. Generally, a full basement underneath the building, and these are very simple buildings, very modern and clean in terms of architectural details. Then we get into the split level. So if you have a ranch style home with more than one level, that's a split level. Also might be referred to as a raised ranch. And this really kind of gets into some of Frank Lloyd Wright's key concepts, having these half floors dividing living and private areas to give you just a little more separation between, like living, dining, kitchen, and bedrooms. And then often these are intended to kind of merge in with the land, often built into hills, things like that. Historians often credit Frank Lloyd Wright with actually inventing these. And he, originated the split level about a half century earlier with his Prairie Style designs. And so, they get kind of simplified down into a kind of a more, common looking split level design that we see today. Here's a couple examples. So they can vary in appearance quite a bit. And then just getting into Prairie Style itself. So Prairie Style homes, late 1800s to early 1900s, are very, very American. We get into Louis Sullivan and his teachings of philosophy here, which really began in the late 1890s in Chicago. And Frank Lloyd Wright, here comes his name again, really set the standards for the Prairie Style, which really were from the arts and crafts movement. So we see, some of the common things we see are large picture windows, side lights on the sides of doors, vertical and horizontal banding of windows, clear story windows above that let light in but, allow for privacy, things like that. Very geometric. A few more examples. Then kind of moving away from a standard single-family house, just to think about, other common types of living spaces, how people live. Well, kind of next to a single-family house, we have townhouses, also known as row houses. So their original intention in many circumstances was to house workers and their families in areas close to where they worked, generally factories. So kind of taking these ideas of a house, but squishing them all together, right, to get more people closer together. They're urban, right? So we see them in city situations, and the big key here is they share common walls. There is no space between each building. They're all touching, sharing that common wall. So they provide privacy, and you have your own space that's really a house, right, if you will. But they're cheaper to build, and they take up less space, and we can get people closer together. Another kind of benefit to a townhouse and having kind of this vertical spacing is there is this nice distinction between private and public zones. The bedrooms can be far separated from, the kitchen and living area because they're on multiple levels, which can be a benefit. Next, in terms of ways people live, are apartments. And thinking about apartment buildings, in New York and Chicago adapted the high-rise early with their residential hotels in the late 1800s. And that really changed, the way people lived. Here's just an example of Cameron Diaz. She has her Kelly Wearstler designed Manhattan apartment here. It was I think it was Architectural Digest. But really think, apartments can vary in size and style quite dramatically, right? So when we're thinking about apartments, apartment living and apartment design is a bit different than single-family houses and possibly even townhouses as well, right? Because we have more people closer together and often people above you or below you. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done when you're thinking about optimizing an apartment layout. You need to think a lot about acoustics. We need to think about ventilation. We need to think about things like natural light. Is the sunlight coming from all four directions in an apartment? If we think of it as a rectangle, probably not, right? So where are those windows? Where are those sources of light? And how do we maximize that? And then finally, we think of mixed-use buildings. So mixed-use buildings are structures that have both commercial and residential aspects. And they're probably the most common buildings that get built around here lately, I think, in terms of, the first floor of these large buildings is commercial, whether it's a grocery store, a bank, a gym, a salon, or all sorts of mixed things can go down on the first floor, and then people live on the levels above. And the idea being getting more business into areas, but then also more people living there, so that in the evening spaces in a city are still alive, rather than when the business is closed, the area is kind of a ghost town, right? So there's a lot of benefits to creating mixed-use areas where people can live near and walk to work and things like that. So reduces commute and impacts on the environment and all sorts of things. So that's our overview of the basic ways in which Americans live.